Good afternoon, all. Thank you for tuning in to today's webinar titled The Development of a Recycled Materials Supplier Dashboard. My name is Mark Horrocks. I'm the Communications Manager for the NACOE program. And before I introduce our presenters this afternoon, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You will have an opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the chat box labelled Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will try our best to address them throughout the session where relevant and during a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. In 2024, sustainability is not just a buzzword, it is a necessity. As Australia strives for a circular economy, a greater emphasis is being placed on recycled materials, but knowing where to source these resources can be a logistical hurdle. That is where NACOE's Recycled Material Supplier Dashboard comes in, acting as your eco-compass, streamlining procurement and connecting you with suppliers. To explain this concept further, I am joined today by Steve Hume, Director of Strategic Procurement at the Department of Transport and Main Roads, Queensland, and one of NACOE's own sustainability experts. Good afternoon, Steve.
Afternoon, Mark.
I'm also joined today by the talented Jamie Harrison, Senior Professional Leader in Sustainability and Materials Performance at the National Transport Research Organisation, formerly the Australian Road Research Board. Good afternoon, Jamie.
Afternoon, Mark.
Steve, to start us off today, can you please provide our audience with some backgrounds on the project and the kinds of objectives NACOE aim to address with the dashboard?
No problems. Thanks, Mark. So I'll just run through a quick agenda before we get started. So we'll talk a little bit about the background and objectives of the project. So it's the NACOE 028 project. You might hear us refer to that throughout. I'll talk a little bit about an overview of the dashboard, the concepts, the data capture, and provide a demonstration of the features of the dashboard as it stands currently in the initial version. There'll be plenty of opportunities for questions. So please, if you've got those, enter them into the Q&A function within the webinar, and we'll come to those as we can. And there'll be an opportunity to provide feedback via Mentimeter as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so just before I get started on the background, so NACOE is a collaborative research agreement between the Department of Transport and Main Roads and the Australian Road Research Board, or the National Transport Research Organisation, ARB, or NTRO as they're well known. NACOE's been running for about 10 years. So we're in 2023-24, we're in the 10th year, and it's an agreement that's signed biannually. So within NACOE, there's a whole heap of research that's covered. We're here talking about sustainability today, but there's also pavements, structures, asset management, heavy vehicles, a whole raft of different streams are addressed through NACOE. So this is only a portion of the whole NACOE program. Really importantly, NACOE is QTRIP funded. So QTRIP is a rolling investment program that TMI runs, and NACOE is funded through that program annually. And if you ever want to know any more about NACOE, there is a great website which contains all the published reports and links to webinars, excellent webinars such as this one. So nacoe.com.au. Next slide, please. So a bit of context around the reason we're doing this project. So a couple of years ago, TMR released a waste to resource strategy. So this is a strategy which sets out TMR's vision to become a zero waste organisation and a transport industry leader through circular economy practices. It's a very short document. It's only 4 pages, and that's the extent of it on the screen there. It's really about setting the tone for TMR's use of recycled materials and waste minimisation. Next slide, please. Within the waste to resource strategy, there's 5 key pillars that are identified. The first is around specifications and processes. So NACOE has done a lot of work around developing technical specifications and documents to set the requirements around recycled material uses. We've done a lot of interagency engagement and internal collaboration, which is the second pillar. So particularly with other state agencies such as the Department of Environment and Science and Department of State Development, whom I believe we have representatives from here today, which is excellent. We've done a lot of work around market engagement and transformation through the strategy or through the strategic pillars. So that's the nature of this webinar today is engaging with industry and sharing the work we're doing and picking up feedback and bringing that into the projects. The fourth pillar is around procurement, a bit of a pet topic of mine, as you might know, around how do we procure more recycled materials into our roadworks, into our projects. And finally, the fifth pillar is around data collection and analysis. So making sure that we're building tools and metrics in place so that we can actually know what we're doing and we can better them. This tool actually helps us collect a lot of that data, and we can also analyze a lot of that data as well. So we're hitting a couple of strategic pillars in this presentation and project. Next slide, please. Within the waste to resource strategy, probably my key takeaway is this message. So the strategy sets out TMR's preferential use of recycled materials over conventional materials, provided that three criteria are met. The first is that those materials, the recycled materials, need to be permitted in accordance with TMR specifications. The second is that they need to be cost competitive. And the third is that they need to be locally available. So that's our preferential use statement. What the strategy doesn't do is mandate the use of recycled materials. There's a really good reason why we don't mandate that use, and it's largely to do with the geographical complexity that we have in Queensland. We have a lot of suppliers in southeast Queensland, or few suppliers, depending on the product and material, and some suppliers on the east coast, but the western and northern parts of the state are quite different geographically and also from a supply chain perspective. So we're careful about the word mandate and how we apply that concept through the strategy. Next slide, please. To support the strategy, TMR developed a technical note. It's called Technical Note 193. It's around the use of recycled materials in road construction. This table that's on the screen is actually in the technical note. It's a bit of a ready reckoner about different applications and different recycled materials that can be used in those various applications. So as you can see there, we allow the use of recycled materials ranging from crushed concrete, crushed brick, glass, reclaimed asphalt pavement, crumb rubber, fly ash and slag, or in situ pavement materials, all the way up to recycled plastic. And we have a whole range of applications that range from pavement to concrete construction, through earthworks, even into geosynthetics and other applications. Anything with a green tick is as of right use, so it's permitted in accordance with the specification, no approval required as such. The R's mean that we're doing research, so that's typically done through NACOE, but also sometimes corporately. And the D means that we're doing demonstrations. So we move beyond that preliminary research phase, and we're putting these things out into field trials and testing their validity in the real world, if you like. Next slide, please. Another artifact that's been produced to support the waste to resource strategy is the S12 tender schedule. So many of you have seen this. This is a mandatory tender schedule for all of TMR's TIC and MIC contracts. It has been for a couple of years now. This is on the screen is just an example of how the schedule looks for unbound pavement materials, but it's applicable to stabilised pavements, asphalt and sprayed ceiling, to concrete, both structural, non-structural and pavement concrete, as well as earthworks, drainage and landscaping. The idea of this schedule is that tenderers on our projects, at the time of tender, they identify how much recycled material to propose to be used. If they're not proposing to use the maximum amount permitted by the specifications, they provide feedback as to why not. So really it's an if not, why not type question. And the objective of this schedule was really around raising awareness about, first of all, what can be done through the specifications, and secondly, getting feedback as to why we're not achieving the maximum that we could be under the specifications. You'll see a very clear linkage to the dashboard that we'll talk about in a couple of moments. Next slide, please.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. Oh, sorry, you're still going?
Yeah, a couple more, Mark.
Sorry,
yeah, thank you.
Sorry,
that's all right. No problems. Okay, so the dashboard that we've been developing over the last couple of years is really around increasing the awareness and visibility of recycled materials on our projects. So this is really about supporting the use of that S12 tender schedule and beyond into construction. But really, it's that upfront point where contractors are bidding for work, understanding what materials are available to be used, and going and establishing the connections within the supply chain for those to be put forwards commercially. It's about showing the availability of recycled materials in a geographical context, which you'll see when Jamie throws the dashboard up in a few moments. And it's intended to be publicly accessible information. So it's not just for proponents, tenders bidding on TMR work or suppliers within that supply chain. It's really intended to be an overarching, publicly accessible dashboard. So we really wanted to make this information available, not just for TMR purposes, but globally, if you like that concept. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of just caveats around the scope of the project. So at this point in time, the dashboard that Jamie will show is only applicable to TMR specifications. So it doesn't mean it couldn't be extended into the future, but for the time being, we've kept that scope quite tight around TMR's specifications and materials that comply with those specifications. The dashboard is opt-in and optional, so we want to make sure that it's not mandatory. Suppliers who aren't on the dashboard still have the ability to produce material and supply that material to TMR projects. It is for information only, so this is a really important point from a commercial perspective. So that just by being identified on the dashboard doesn't mean that a supplier has passed any registration or pre-qualification requirements. All of those existing requirements still exist, and there's systems and processes in place to achieve those. Individual tenderers need to actually make sure that they're contacting suppliers and making sure that the information in the dashboard is current at the time that they're intended to be used, and making sure that they can actually supply material in the quantity and the time frame that's relevant for that project. By representing suppliers within the dashboard, TMR is not endorsing them, not speaking to their credentials to be able to supply a conforming product or anything like that. It's just purely a way of increasing awareness about the fact that they exist within the supply chain. It's not intended to facilitate procurement either, so it's not really a way for contractors to engage or purchase subcontractors or suppliers into projects. It's really, again, about awareness and information. And it is something that's going to be updated progressively. So it's not going to be that we update it every day or every week even. It'll probably be a monthly or a quarterly update once the dashboard's published. It'll just be something to again, look for to tweak that broader awareness. And it really is intended to capture suppliers who can practically supply to Queensland. It doesn't mean you have to be in Queensland, but if you can't practically supply gravel to Queensland or additives for a certain type of product into Queensland, then we wouldn't be intending to register those suppliers within the dashboard. And finally, and above all, I'd encourage you, once the dashboard does go live and you have an opportunity, please read the terms and conditions. There's quite a lot of valuable information in those that is very relevant to proceed with. Next slide, please.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve, and sorry for getting a bit eager there. Jamie, if I could throw over to you now, could you please explain the data collection process and the types of criteria you and the team used when you were deciding what to include?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, absolutely. So I'll just go through now a little bit more detail on the dashboard itself and the way that we've been capturing information for this current version of the dashboard. So as Steve mentioned, it's really an opt-in process, and we've opened that up at the moment. Currently, we're taking in supplier nominations and product listings simply via email. And we're using an Excel format to essentially capture that information for the dashboard at this stage. So the information that we are capturing, so first and foremost, there is the supplier details. So we obviously want to capture that high level information about the supplier and the company itself. So the name, the website, some contact details, and obviously the physical location of that site. The next piece of information is obviously the products. So we're capturing or allowing suppliers to list as many products that they have within their organisation that contain recycled materials and that meet TMR specifications. So the information that we're essentially capturing about the product is the name, both using the standard TMR terminology of those products in accordance with the various specifications, and also giving the option for suppliers to detail their product, whether that's a description or proprietary name. There is a space for that to be captured. In addition to that, the key piece of information we want to understand is the recycled materials that's actually contained in those products. So we're capturing the recycled materials. It may be one or it may be multiple, depending on the product, and then the percentage of recycled material relative to that one. Again, as we mentioned, this is in relation to TMR standards and specifications. So we're listing the various standards and TMR registers where that's applicable that might suit those products. And then lastly, there's a space for suppliers, if they have one, to list an environmental product declaration if that's available for their product. As we mentioned, this is the scope is limited to those products that fall within the TMR specifications and are outlined under that S12 Waste to Resource Plan tender schedule. And again, building on what Steve said, the suppliers are really responsible for the accuracy of that information and for updating it as well. So it's an ongoing process as materials or as products may change, may be added, may be removed from availability. We do encourage suppliers to reach out and provide us that updated information so that we can continually keep the dashboard as up to date as possible. The dashboard itself, which I'll show in a minute, is both a map and a tabulated view of the suppliers and the products. We've captured some basic statistics about the information that's available on the dashboard so that we can sort of keep a bit of a track of how it's progressing and the types of products and suppliers that are available. The terms and conditions will, of course, be available on the dashboard itself. The information will be downloadable, so users will be able to filter or search and then potentially save that information to refer back to later. And as I mentioned, there are a few categories that will be able to be filtered and searched across the dashboard to help you find the products you're looking for or potentially a recycled material in a given location. The products just listed here in detail. I won't read through them all, but this is essentially the products that fall within the TMR specifications at this time that have an allowance of recycled materials, and this is essentially the categories or the scope of the dashboard at the moment. Similarly, the next slide lists the recycled materials, so the constituents of those products and the various recycled materials that may be included in the dashboard. Just a note down there at the bottom is that we are aware that there is a bit of a variation in the supply chain of recycled materials. So we know that there may be suppliers that provide a product that contains a component of recycled material. For example, an asphalt product that has a component of chrome rubber in it. So we want that to be able to be listed on the dashboard, but we also want the opportunity to list the constituent materials as products themselves, if that's applicable. So a recycler that may sell chrome rubber itself, not produced into any product, but the constituent material itself is also able to be listed on the dashboard as a product. And then again, lastly, I won't read through these, but these are the specifications that we're covering. So this aligns with what Steve showed earlier in the S12 Waste to Resource tender schedule. Now, jumping into the exciting bit, I'm going to go through a live dashboard demonstration of the current version of the dashboard that we have at this point in time. So bear with me while I just change screens and we'll jump through into that live demonstration. So you'll see in front of you, this is our recycled materials supplier dashboard that we have available at this point in time. So the key that we have there obviously is it's a map. The aim is for it to be easy to use and visual and a simple process for you to be able to move around, see where the suppliers are in relation to your location or your project locations. We've overlaid the TMR districts on the map, and if you move in a little bit closer, you'll see as well that the local government areas are also overlaid on the map, and then the road network as well, if that helps you to orientate yourself in the map. A second point I'll just make on the high-level visuals of the dashboard is that we have color-coded the supplier type. So you'll note down the right-hand corner, we have a legend, and that basically talks about the types of suppliers that we have in the dashboard. So these are categorized at this point in time as recyclers. So again, those that may be producing a constituent recycled material, bituminous products, so our asphalt and our spray suppliers, other, which covers a number of other different categories, and then the quarries as well. So those are simply just a basic color-coded tool for you to be able to find what type of suppliers might be in your area. The high-level information that we capture about the suppliers is able to be seen if you simply hover over a supplier. So if you just hover over that dot, you'll be able to see the name, the address, the website, and then that supplier type as well. So that gives you that basic information just at a glance of what the supplier does or might provide. On the left-hand side, we have all our filters. So as I mentioned, the filters that we have at the top are our location filters. So you're able to filter by your district or your local government area. So you're able to sort of potentially you may not be looking for a specific product, you may just be looking for a local supplier. And so we want you to be able to essentially drill into that particular location and try and understand who might be nearby you, and that might inform the recycled materials that you potentially would like to acquire for an upcoming project. The other three filters at this point in time are about the product and the material itself. So we have the product names, the specification names that are related to those products, and then the constituent recycled material as well. And I'll just reiterate there that the crumb rubber, for example, and crushed concrete, they're both listed as a product in itself and as a recycled material constituent that may make up another product. And simply these filters can just be applied by selecting whatever you're looking for. So you may be, in this case, I've just filtered to just crumb rubber materials, and you could apply a location filter as well, or zoom in onto those suppliers to understand a little bit more about those products. Just reset our filters for the time being. Another feature that we have, again, to help you locate local suppliers is that you can drill into a specific location on the map. So you can essentially, up here in the search bar, look for a location and head to that zone and look to understand who might be in that area. In this case, I've just gone into Rocky and I can see that there are a couple of suppliers in that area. So I could click into each of those and try and understand a little bit more about those suppliers or the products that are available. Another feature that we have added as well is essentially a location radial selection. So you're able to select that field and basically pull out a location radius from a given point, whether that's your project site or your local government site. And you can see how many suppliers are within a given region. One of the key aspects we know from a sustainability focus is that it's really key to get local suppliers. You don't want to, be hauling materials from a long distance just for the sake of using recycled materials. So this helps you sort of picture how close those suppliers are. If I drag out over a couple of those local nearby suppliers that I'm interested in, I can pull up a detailed tabulated page about those suppliers. So in this case, I've just got a couple of example suppliers. On the left-hand side, we're able to see the details about the supplier itself. So the name, that address, contact details, and website will be available. And then on the right-hand half of the table is essentially the product listing. So that will include the product name. Again, the product description can either be left blank or it might be a proprietary product name. And then we have the TMR specification and the TMR register where that's relevant as well. And then lastly, the recycled materials, of course, will be on the last couple of columns with the percentage that relates to that recycled material. And this may not always add up to 100. These products may not be 100% recycled. So there may be a small component of recycled material in each. And hopefully this will allow you to understand the amount of recycled materials that are available to you. The information on these tabulated displays can be downloaded as well. So as we mentioned, as Steve mentioned earlier, the dashboard itself doesn't necessarily act as a procurement tool. You're not able to sort of interact with the supplier through the dashboard itself, but you are able to capture this information, and whether that's downloading it and then giving that supplier a ring or heading to a website to delve into that product a little bit more deeply. So we want this information to be able to be saved, and obviously it'll be great to sort of revisit the dashboard on a regular basis in the case that it's been updated, but hopefully the information that you download will be useful to sort of revisit as well. I'll head back home and I'll just show you the last couple of features that we have on the dashboard at this point in time. So down the bottom, you'll note that we have our contact details available. So our waste to resource at NACOE email address is essentially that address that we're using for the data collection process for our suppliers to contact us. And also if anyone has any questions or usability notes about the dashboard, that email will be there as well. The terms and conditions that Stephen mentioned earlier will be available on the dashboard. So there'll be a quick link through to those through to those terms and conditions via the dashboard. And then the last feature we have is some high-level statistics. So this charts function at the top right-hand side of the dashboard takes you to this sort of high-level statistics page where you can capture some basic information about the suppliers and the types of suppliers, the location, and then some details around the recycled products that we have. So the number of products that contain a given recycled material, or the number of suppliers that sell a specific recycled material product. And this information hopefully will be able to give us a bit of an ongoing picture of the growth of the dashboard and also of the growth of the recycled material availabilities across Queensland more broadly. Bring us back home, and then I will leave it there. That's our dashboard, and I'll throw back to Mark to continue on with our presentation.
Thank you so much for that demonstration, Jamie. We're now going to begin answering some of the questions submitted during today's presentation so far. Just as a reminder to all of our attendees today, you can still submit your questions through the chat box Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So to start us off, perhaps I'll give this one to you, Steve. The first question of the day, pardon me. They've asked, you mentioned that the dashboard is applicable to TMR specifications. Are there any plans to expand its use in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's a great question. So the intention really for now is to keep it to the TMR specs. However, it's relevant to point out that a lot of local governments within Queensland actually do use the TMR specifications for their own work. So there's a much broader applicability beyond just, say, TMR projects. They may or may not use our S12 tender schedule, but conceptually the specifications provide that as a right use for a lot of local government work as it is. Beyond our specifications, look, the world is our oyster. It could be applied into, residential, civil construction, mining, a whole range of things, but it's not within the scope of the current NACOE project. Perhaps in the future, if someone wants to partner with NACOE to expand the use of the dashboard, that could be something we'd be happy to discuss.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. This one's open to either Steve or Jamie. Another attendee has asked, in terms of increased heavy freight loadings and electric very heavy vehicles using the network more often into the future, have there been any considerations with recycled materials being able to withstand the loadings?
I might tackle that one first, Jamie, if you like. So I guess this project isn't about the technical bit about whether a certain recycled material should or shouldn't be used in the specifications. This project is looking more broadly about the awareness piece. However, what I would say is that when we do that research, and we've done endless amounts of that research through NACOE over the decade that we've had the program, we follow a very rigorous assessment approach to make sure that when we're looking at recycled materials, that they're fit for purpose, so that they provide as good, if not better, performance than conventional materials. Oh goodness, it's been a lot. I've moved into a different role and I've forgotten everything. They're not going to cause any damage to the environment, the community, or workers. They're re-recyclable at the end of their life, and then they've got no long-term operational issues like contaminated land. So we go through that process to check all those things before we put them into the specifications. That's the process for having research and development, doing field trials and so forth. So we're very confident that if it's in the specification, it will perform to the standard it needs to perform to. The increasing axle loads from heavy vehicle, that's another completely separate issue, which is going to cause an increased maintenance burden on the road network beyond recycled or virgin materials.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. One for you, Jamie. What can I do if the recycled materials I supply aren't covered by TMR's current specifications?
Thanks,
or maybe Steve too, if you'd like to jump in as well.
That's all right. Yeah, so it does lean into what Steve has said before, in the terms of, obviously there is continued research going on to look into TMR specifications and to continue to explore the different types of recycled materials that are available. So potentially those might be products that require some further research for TMR specifications to allow. In the sense of, if your product maybe does fall into the TMR specification, but you haven't yet been registered or you haven't yet gone through the path of testing, I would encourage you to look at the TMR specifications, as those will provide some information about what the requirements are to meet the specs, or how to get on a various register, whether that's a quarry register or an asphalt mix design, and how to go about that process. So hopefully the information that's captured in the TMR specifications would be able to guide you on how to ensure your product can meet those. Steve, did you have anything to add, or?
It's a pretty good response, Jamie.
Fantastic. I'll give this one to you, Steve. Ryan has asked, I would like to get on the portal or start the process. Can you share the link, please? So is it currently available, or? Yeah.
No. So the actual dashboard itself is not currently publicly available. We're in the internal development processes, and you'll see in a little bit when we get to the Menti questions, there's an opportunity to provide some feedback to tweak the dashboard before we go for that final push to release. If you'd like to be part of it, we'll send out an email to the group after the session, just to give you the details of how to submit your product for to be on the dashboard, essentially. So once we've gone through some internal processes to just digest the feedback we get this afternoon, we're going to make some decisions and get back to you about the timeframes to actually release the dashboard out to the big bad world.
Fantastic. Steve, while I've got you on a roll, why doesn't TMR just mandate the use of recycled materials?
Yeah, we get this question a lot, and as I said before, it's largely to do with availability. So we've got to be really careful that we don't artificially establish a demand, and then we can't meet that. The industry can't meet that demand. So a great example would be if we said that we've got to use 30% reclaimed asphalt pavement in our new asphalt in the whole of the state, because that may exist in southeast Queensland, but it just doesn't exist in even really in the Sunshine Coast or certainly beyond that. So we have to be really aware that that supply chain analysis changes and fluctuates all the time. And so the available resource from a recycled material perspective will change geographically, but it will also change across time. So that's really what we're trying to make sure we're ahead of, is that mandate. The other issue is that we can actually have a direct impact on cost, and we need to make sure, particularly in the current financial environment, that we're being really sensible and careful with cost, that we know the impact of cost from those supply chains, that we have to factor into our projects accordingly.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for that, Steve. Jamie, I've got a question here around functionality. Can I filter multiple features at a time? For example, if I wanted to search for crushed concrete products, but only in a certain local government area.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, absolutely. So we have designed it so those filters or those search functions that I showed on the left of the dashboard work in tandem. So you can essentially filter for a given recycled material at the same time as filtering into a specific location, or as I demonstrated, you could even zoom in to an area that you're looking into, and then filter the dashboard and narrow down the suppliers that are in that region. So yes, absolutely, we want users to be able to go by location as well as by the type of products that they're looking for.
Fantastic. Steve, I'll throw this one to you. And then we might move on to our Mentimeter survey. But Josh has asked, and this is maybe just a bit of another broader question, but are there any incentives for a project to use recycled products? We currently have a stigma that recycled isn't as good as virgin. It's proving very hard to educate our customers.
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the moment, the S12 tender schedule is for information. So it's not a weighted or an assessed criteria in terms of whether you win or lose a contract, a tender. That's been done very deliberately through a lot of industry consultation in the development of that S12 and the waste to resource strategy more broadly. we are aware, as I said before, that I've said many times before, we need to do more work in the procurement space around recycled materials and how we get these things happening into our contracts. So we're interested in doing some trials around, how do we get more recycled materials through perhaps weighting something like the S12 in a tender assessment process. That's a piece of work that's ongoing within TMR. The other piece of work that's happening at the moment is there's a real focus, as everyone is probably well aware, around decarbonisation and managing emissions and carbon values and calculating carbon. So that piece is rapidly moving, and so we're careful that we don't kind of trip up in that area just yet. But I expect we'll see some incentives and other tools come into play around decarbonisation, because we've got to be careful here. Recycling is excellent, but decarbonisation is also a priority. So we've got to make sure that we don't use recycled materials at the expense of carbon, and that we don't, just sort of forego them at the expense of decarbonisation. So it's finding that right balance that's very important.
Fantastic. And I know I said that was the last one, but there's a great question here from Wendy, Jamie, that might actually link us into our feedback portion of today. So I might send this one over to you. Would you consider including annual capacity of the supplier? You mentioned not including availability, as that would need to be kept up to date, but the annual capacity might help us to understand what's possible.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Wendy. That is a great question. And this does feed into the next section we'll go into, where we welcome your feedback on additional, features or items that you would like to see on the dashboard. So that could be something that we consider. Obviously, we would have to do a little bit of work around how that functions and potentially how well suppliers are able to give us that information, or how often that needs to be updated to be accurate. But that's definitely a really interesting field that could add value to the dashboard. Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. And thank you to our audience today for sending in all those questions. Unfortunately, I can't address them all, but as we mentioned, we're moving into a bit of a feedback portion of today's presentation. So please feel free to provide feedback here with Mentimeter. So Mentimeter is an anonymous feedback platform that will provide live visual feedback in the form of polls as we move through a number of questions regarding the dashboard Jamie and Steve have presented to us this afternoon. So on your screen now, you should see a QR code, which we're inviting you all to scan. Otherwise, you can head to menti.com and enter the 7-digit code, which will remain at the top of the screen throughout. So if you don't join immediately, you can feel free to join at a later point. While I give our audience just a few seconds there to scan that QR, I'll throw another question over to you, Jamie. This question has asked, what happens if a product only has a small component of recycled materials in it?
Thanks. Yeah, so that sort of links back to the table format that I demonstrated in the dashboard. So we do have that field where we're able to essentially capture the recycled material that's in the product, and then the percentage as well. And so that's going to relate to that. And it may not always add up to 100. In most cases, it probably won't add up to 100% recycled. So a product might be able to be listed there with a 5% component or a 10% component of recycled material. And that will, of course, vary across products and materials and in accordance with the TMR specifications and the various percentages that are allowed there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. I think that's probably enough time. So if you would like to take us through the Mentimeter survey.
Yeah, certainly. Bear with me while I change screens. Alrighty. So as Mark mentioned, this is essentially going to be a bit of a live feedback moment that you'll have to essentially join in and provide your answers. So your responses will be shown live on the screen, and whether that's a poll or word answers, we'll be able to sort of see where our responses are heading. So I'll encourage you again to head to menti.com and enter that code at the top of the screen. That'll stay there at the top of the screen so you can join in as we go, and we'll essentially move through. And hopefully our aim here is to really capture your thoughts and your feedback on the dashboard itself based on what you've seen today. So we really want to understand, does it seem like it'll work for you? Have you got any other suggestions, any ideas for what you might want to add? Or are there any other features that you could recommend? any other materials you'd like to see on the dashboard, and so on and so forth. So our first question simply here is how will you be using the dashboard? Are you a supplier, a buyer, potentially both, or is that not really applicable to your role on a day-to-day basis? Moving through to our next question. Our next question is really just about your first impressions of the dashboard. So just give it a rating 1 to 5 based on the content that we're going to include on the dashboard, the sort of functionality or the features that might be there. And then the visual design as well, so an idea of how it looks. And this will really hopefully inform any updates, any changes that we might think about making to the dashboard. I'll give everyone a minute to provide those answers. That's great. Pretty good there, 4 out of 5. That's good. Thanks, everyone. All right. I'll move through to the next question, and hopefully you should be able to continue to answer those even as I move through. The Menti, if you join along, will prompt you to answer the questions that you haven't yet. So moving on to the next question, this is really about how often you anticipate that you might actually utilize this dashboard. This will help us understand potentially the update frequencies that we may need to consider on the dashboard. It would be I guess an interesting piece to understand how often you might find yourself reaching for this sort of information. I'm seeing a lot of monthlies, so that's great, and a fair few quarterlies there. Obviously, there is that not applicable option if this doesn't really relate to your role on a day-to-day basis. Excellent. The next question is really around the suppliers and the information that we capture about the suppliers. So we mentioned earlier that we have the company name, contact details, website, location. Is there any other information that you feel it would be really valuable to capture about the suppliers themselves, not necessarily the products they supply, but the actual company and its features? Just give everyone a moment. Thanks, everyone. These are really great responses that are coming through. And then we're seeing there again capacity and availability and things are showing up. So that's obviously something that people are interested in understanding, the volumes and the availability. That's great. Thanks all. Those are some really good responses. I'll jump through to our next question while you can sort of continue to answer some of those. So the next question here is really around that same question, but on the products. So is there any additional detail fields that would be really valuable to capture about the products themselves? So just a reminder, the information that we currently are looking to capture is essentially the name, TMR, and both a proprietary or a description of the product. We're also capturing the recycled material and the percentages of that recycled material, the standards and specifications, the register, if that's applicable, so for our asphalt and our quarry products, for example. And then the last category that we had allowed room for was EPDs. So if any suppliers had an environmental product declaration, that would hopefully be able to be listed on there as well. Getting some great responses coming through here. So I'm seeing a few that prior use, that's a really interesting one in terms of case studies or applications where that may have been used before. As Steve mentioned, the decarbonisation is a really key focus at the moment. So that CO2 emissions information there is something that's really interesting that could be valuable to capture about the product. So thank you for all these suggestions and ideas that are coming through. Awesome. Yeah, seeing a lot of carbon ones there. That's awesome. Yep. Alrighty, jumping through to our next question while you continue to type in some of your responses. this is here around is potentially for our suppliers that are already listed on the dashboard. So those that have jumped in early and already submitted a product, did you have any feedback on the data collection process that you underwent there? So this might only be applicable to a few of our attendees that have jumped onto the dashboard in the early days. But hopefully as we move through and more people are interested, we can continue to capture some more information about the actual data collection process. Give everyone a minute there if there are any responses.
Jamie, while we're waiting for some responses, I might just mention the origins of this project was really that when we did some industry consultation, probably a couple of years ago now, about what could NACOE be doing to increase recycled material, just generally, but also to increase recycled material uptake. This was actually seen as a bit of a priority at that point in time, as was it raised with our individual consultation. That's TMR's individual consultations with industry. So there's been a bit of a body or a groundswell behind this previously. And I guess we're hoping that that's still very current. We've got a lot of interested suppliers ready to jump on this once it goes online.
Yep, thanks, Steve. Good point. All right, we're getting a lot of not applicable, so that's all good. We'll jump on to the next point there. But thank you for that comment there around response time. Excellent. So the next question here is around that current list of recycled materials. Obviously, it is limited to that scope of TMR specifications and standards and specifications at this point in time, but we do just want to understand a bit of feedback around if that list is extensive enough, or if you're looking for potentially some other recycled materials, and that might feed into future considerations we have for expanding the dashboard. And I am seeing a lot of no's. So the next question we have around here will give you essentially an opportunity to list those recycled materials that you would like to see that aren't listed. I'll jump through to that one, and I'll allow our users our attendees, sorry, who have listed no, to potentially suggest what you would like to see in terms of recycled materials. Compost is a good one. Organic matter. That's Do you have any thoughts on these recycled materials, Steve, at this point in time, or happy to jump through to the next one?
Yeah, it's probably just to get a bit more awareness about what that list is. So tyres, we have crumb rubber, obviously. It probably depends on what we consider as the material or the product and that kind of conversation. Yeah, I'm really interested in, there was one there not yet specified. Sorry, it keeps moving around on me. So I guess that's the point about it's got to be covered by the current specifications that we're looking to try and have that framework around. Perhaps in the future we'll broaden it out into some of that as well.
Great. All right, jumping through to the next question while you put in these responses here. Thank you for those ones. The last question, or the last couple of questions we have here, this is essentially around the list of products. This sort of relates a little bit to the recycled materials, but this is more about those completed products. So whether that's a modified asphalt that contains a component of recycled material, or a specific unbound granular material that has a constituent makeup of recycled materials. And again, getting a couple of no's there, so I'll jump through to the next one to give everyone an opportunity to potentially list those products that you're actually interested in seeing a little bit more about.
Steve, just while Jamie's giving people some time there too, I might ask just another one we didn't get to. Is there any kind of stat deck NACOE require the supplier to complete with regards to claims about recycled content?
No, there's not. To be listed on the dashboard, we're trusting suppliers as a open and honest relationship there that we've got with them. There will need to be the obvious conformance requirements for supply, and that's really what it boils down to. If you can't supply it to the job at the end of the day and pass those conformance requirements, that's where it's going to get caught. So, you know, we're relying on all parties in the supply chain to have that honesty up front. Yeah.
And I'll just add on to that, that feeds into the terms and conditions that we've also listed on the dashboard. So that'll be available, and that sort of outlines, I guess, the responsibilities of the suppliers in listing that information. And we do encourage suppliers to, you know, update that info if it's no longer available, or if the product changes. We will have that sort of iterative process where we're able to update the listings on the dashboard. Seeing a couple of responses coming through on this question here. So we've got some of those more ancillary applications being listed. So pipes, road furniture. So those are some great comments coming through there. Jump through to our next question. And this is essentially around the actual features. So we showed the map, we showed the tables, we showed those high-level charts and statistics, and the sort of radial feature where you can understand the distance from suppliers, the feature where you can, you know, zone into a given location. So is there any other additional feature of the dashboard and its functionality that you think would be really valuable or add to that user experience of the dashboard?
Again, Steve, while we're waiting for those answers to come in, I might ask you another one. Will there be an opportunity to use RAP in sprayed steel aggregates, mainly under the asphalt layers?
Oh, again, that wouldn't really be the scope of this project to be looking at those new kind of applications or products. So that's something that we could certainly put forwards for a bit of consideration by the relevant subject matter experts, whether they see scope for that in the future. So yeah, we might just pass that on to the guys as an idea. And if it comes through the research process and it ends up in the specs, then you'll certainly see it mirrored into this this dashboard in the future. I'd say, yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks everyone for sending these through. These are some great suggestions. We've got another couple of there on price, timelines and availability of the product. And then date when the information was last updated and validated. That's a really good point. That's something that's really valuable to take on board. So thank you for sending those ideas through. Give everyone another minute as we see a couple more responses coming through, and then I believe we just have one last question before we wrap up for today's session. So this is essentially a space, if you haven't been able to capture your feedback before, this is essentially another chance for you to just pop in anything that didn't really suit any of those other questions, any feedback, any ideas, any thoughts that you have on the dashboard or the purpose of the dashboard, the functionality, anything like that. Feel free to jump that through into this last question. Give everyone a minute, and then I think that's the closer of our feedback round, and that's been really great. Everyone sending through that information.
It's always nice to get positive feedback. So thank you, whoever that is,
Yes.
sending it through. Yeah, thanks very much.
Everyone. Just that around there in how do I access the dashboard. We'll touch on that in a little bit, and the sort of the plan and the options for launch. And answering that question there around will there be formal opportunities to provide feedback suggestions prior to the launch? So obviously you're welcome to chuck things through now in this space, but also that email, that waste to resource email is always open. So you're welcome to send through feedback and suggestions through that contact as well. Alrighty.
Yeah, just for context there, Jamie, sorry, if that's someone from industry and you're sort of familiar with the process that TMR would normally follow for, say, a specification update, We're not necessarily going to follow that same process with this, given that it's sort of an opt-in, it's the shell. So we may not have that same formal kind of, here's the dashboard, give us your feedback on it in writing and so forth. So that's what this is really intended to facilitate.
Thanks, Steve. All right, Mark, I'll throw back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for taking us through that survey there, Jamie. There was definitely some interesting feedback there, so no doubt that will be useful to you and your team. Now, a few people kind of raised the question, what are the next steps for the dashboard?
Yeah. So as we said, we'll essentially be collating all of that feedback that's come through in today's session and do a bit of a review and see how that's gonna fit into the dashboard and the next version. And then we'll essentially look to establish a bit of a strategy around that public release of the dashboard. And as Steve mentioned earlier, we'll hopefully reach out to the group after this session with a little bit more information around hopefully timelines or format and what that release might look like once we sort of digest the feedback and build that strategy. We are still accepting submissions, so the contact details will be available at the last slide, and you're welcome to submit information. If you haven't got the Excel form that we're using for suppliers, feel free to contact us and we'll send that out to you so that we can populate some more suppliers into the dashboard. So again, that's an iterative process. If you've already submitted information to the dashboard, you're welcome to provide us additional products or updates to products of info that you already have there. And that's essentially our plan for the next phase. Steve, did you have anything to add, or is that all?
No, thanks, Jamie. That was really good. Thanks everyone for participating. We really appreciate your involvement. These things are nowhere near as good if we just dream up an idea and we don't get that feedback. So having really honest and constructive feedback is so important to the process. So thank you for participating.
Fantastic. Well, to close us up today, just to echo Steve's sentiments there. Firstly, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Jamie, for guiding us through the latest developments of NACOE's recycled material supplier dashboard. And thank you, everyone, for attending and participating in today's webinar. We do hope you gained something valuable from the presentation. As Jamie mentioned, if you do have any questions about the dashboard, please contact waste2resource@naco.com.au. Or any general NACOE inquiries to info.naco@arb.com.au. Lastly, if you do wish to revisit anything discussed today, a recording of this webinar will be made available on NACOE's LinkedIn page. Lastly, on behalf of NACOE and our presenters, thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you again on the next NACOE webinar. Have a wonderful day, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.